Don't worry, it's
I'm very
not your
glad that
fault.
you're all here, and I'll get to the point as quick as possible. So, besides being assistant professor at Matvey Bell University, I'm also a researcher at Central European Institute for Asian Studies, and I'm focusing on Japanese foreign and security policy. Without further ado, I will um, share my presentation with you, which I prepared for today. Maybe I'll just turn off my camera so it won't be so demanding for the internet connection. And can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Now we can see it.
Yeah, okay. So I will start briefly with Japan after 1945, what it meant. So yeah, I'm sorry, some part of the presentation are apparently in Slovak still. But anyway, on 15th of August 1945, there was an unconditional surrender. Um, Japan was after two atomic bombings, Japan was forced to surrender. It was formally signed at the board of USS Missouri later on 2nd of September. And what happened was that a supreme command of Allied powers took over, which was led by Douglas MacArthur, American general. What was important that during the war, besides enormous losses of human lives, Japan lost also 4/5 of their ships, 1/3 of production machinery, and 1/4 of trucks, trains, various other cars. So it significantly crippled their economy and possibility of any economical recovery. They also lost territories gained after 1894, most notably Korean Peninsula, Taiwan, half of Sakhalin, and Kuril Island chain, and many other territories that they gained through their expansion, mostly in Southeast Asia and China. I won't get into this. It was the Northern Territories. So after the surrender, there were so-called Japanese 3D. It was a process similar to one that took place in Germany after war, except for the fact that in case of Germany, it also included denazification. So there are 4Ds in Germany. In case of Japan, it was demilitarization, decartelization, and democratization. Um, Between years 1947 1951, they adopted a new constitution. The thing is that they were told to write a new constitution, but Japanese did. Um, what they did was they actually uh, drafted something very similar to the previous one, which was seen as problematic from American point of view. So U.S. experts drafted a constitution for Japan, including very famous Article Number 1, which says, aspiring sincerely to international peace based on justice and order, Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat of use of force as means of settling international disputes. Later on, this article was well, it was criticized, and even Americans blamed themselves for this article. Later, President Richard Nixon said that this article was an honest mistake of United States. In 1951, San Francisco Peace Treaty was signed. USSR, even though they were victorious power of the Second World War, did not sign the treaty due to the territory. They still have not signed a formal peace treaty. there's not a formal peace treaty signed between Japan and Russia till this day. And also in 1951, there was a security treaty signed between United States and Japan. Moving on, there was due to the constitution, there was a new political system in Japan emerging, and those are two most prominent figures of Japan that day. One of them is Prime Minister Yoshida, which was first Prime Minister of Japan, and the other one is Nobusuke Kishi, who was accused of war crimes, but he was then released. So it said that he's a U.S. most favorite war criminal, or it was said at the time. He was a grandfather of late. Those two men, and we can see consequences till this day. When Yoshida was a leftist, focused heavily on cooperation with United States, was had more of a. He wanted to get rid of articleize Japan, so that Japan can become. Oh, you're still not hearing. And okay, just a second.
Okay, I think there was a delay.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, I will go just with the PC audio. So I don't know where you lost me. At which point?
You're explaining basically this LDP system. And
Yeah.
about,
Okay. So I'll get you.
The U.S. favorite
Okay.
war criminal.
Okay. Favorite war criminal. So yeah, as I mentioned, yeah. So as I mentioned, he had quite a hawkish. Kishi had quite a hawkish stance towards Article 9. So he wanted to get out of the constitution. He wanted to normalize Japan to become a regular power with its own military, being independent on United States. This is a kind of bipolarity which exists within Japanese politics till this day. And what does LDP system mean? Well, Liberal Democratic Party is the most prominent, strongest party on the Japanese political scene. They ruled almost uninterrupted, but I think there were only two or three governments they weren't heading. So they ruled Japan for most of its post-war history, and the system LDP means that they were closely tied to big businesses and to ministry bureaucracies, mostly the famous Ministry of Industry and Trade. So they were holding quite a prominent position due to this system as well, which is well. Some say that it's very specific for Japan and its democracy. So it's not a liberal democracy, or it wasn't liberal democracy as we know it in, for example, in Europe. It was very specific democracy, at least for the second half of the 20th century. Actually, LDP system kind of became loser, especially in the 21st century. So Japan became catch-up champion. Maybe you know, and it's said that it lived or it caused so economic miracle. Between 1948 and 1950, there was a severe economic crisis. Prices went up 1,200%, and Foreign Minister of the United States Dulles said that Japan should focus on exporting cocktail napkins. So they had no perspective of any economic growth. But there came Yoshida, and he focused solely on maximization of economic growth, which was enabled because Japan didn't have to spend no money for their own defense, even though we are at the very beginning of the Cold War, where every nation in the world was essentially was building up its military potential. Yeah, this one is not translated. I'm sorry for that. So Korean War, it's said to be gift from the gods. Why? Because for the first, it meant that Japan was allowed to build national police reserves in 1950, which were built to allow United States move military forces from Japan to Korean Peninsula. So there had to be some force to keep an order in Japan, so they were allowed to build those. And also it meant huge economical benefits, because Japan was producing and for US military needs during the Korean War. They also provided services for US or allied soldiers. And maybe you've seen MASH, a TV series. So basically, if you saw that, you know that most of the soldiers were, if they happen to go for some vacation from the war, they happen to go to Japan. And how did actually Japan became ketchup champion? So they increased, for example, their steel production. That's one of indicators of economic growth, or was indicator of economic growth back at the time. You can see that in 20 years they increased the steel production 8 times. They were also very innovative in terms of shipbuilding. They came up with several new procedures how to build ships. Also, companies like Sony, Toyota, Kyocera, Honda were established at the time from very small businesses. They grew into large international corporations. Funny story, you can see the transistor or the small radio from Sony, which is iconic product. They were very good at marketing because it was very simple. They were able to make it quite small, but still they needed somehow to sell it to people. So the owner or the founder of the company, he made his pocket on a shirt quite a little bit bigger, so that he could fit the radio into it, and that's how he promoted the product, kind of like Steve Jobs of the 50s in Japan. Japan also created famous Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, which helped with setting strict policies, helping Japanese producers on foreign markets, but also protecting domestic market from foreign import. After the war, Japanese were forced to leave the idea of zaibatsu, so conglomerates of huge companies, for example, like Mitsubishi or Suzuki were the examples of that, or Yamaha, let's say. But they created something very similar after the war, and it was Keiretsu. So those were conglomerates linked to state, ministry, banks, and it was horizontally and vertically integrated. So they were able to protect the market from the foreign influence, and the goal of those conglomerates was profitability in the long term. The negative aspect of this policy is that small businesses were absorbing market shocks. So obviously those huge companies were always able to somehow very which you can see they are all related to the Fuji Bank. There are several huge companies like each company owns shares in other companies within the group, and they are all financed by this bank. So they want to, develop some cooperation, reach for partners within the group. And yeah, in 1960, French President Charles de Gaulle called Japanese prime minister a transistor salesman. However, in 1962, Japanese GDP took over France's GDP. 5 years later, it took over UK, and in 1968, it took over West Germany and became the second largest economy in the world. Also, there was a famous plan of Prime Minister Ikeda. It was called Income Doubling Plan. The goal was to double the size of the economy in 10 years, which would require 7.2% growth per year. Anyway, they managed to do the average growth higher than 10% a year. So they were done with the income doubling plan in I think in 7 years or something like that. And you can see that their GDP went from $91 billion in 1965 to 1,065 billion US dollars in 1980, which is enormous jump, and therefore it's called a Japanese miracle. Gradually, the economic growth was slowing down, obviously, because they were catching with the standard of living of the West. Also, there was increasing internal consumption, meaning Japanese people had a lot more money. Also, there was oil crisis in 1973, which Japan very, very pragmatically oriented itself on energy efficient industry. So they were leaving energy consuming industries like metallurgy and so on. In 1980s, Japan became perceived as a threat in the US, especially in terms of economy. And also the problematic part was that Japan was still not paying for its own defense. So they were still relying on enormous military potential of the United States, and they were investing all their wealth into the further economic growth. So United States tried to strike some agreements. So there were Plaza Accords in 1985, which aimed to balance the negative trade balance between United States and Japan. Well, they worked, but not as much as United States would hope. And there were some ideas or thoughts or general perspective was that Japan will take over and will become a new global leader. In 1988, George Soros said that there's a transfer of economic and financial power from the United States to Japan that's happening. Also, then Prime Minister Nakasone said that Japan's entering new era where Japan will become very proactive actor on the international scene, and they will do more to build a new world. And also, with the end of the Cold War, it was expected that a nation which didn't invest nearly no money into military, into defense, into weapons, that this nation will lead a world into new era, which was very optimistic point of view at the time, but it was quite common, and that they will lead somehow a new era of automatization, era of IT technologies, and so on. But what happened? Can you still see the presentation?
Yes, we see your presentation. We hear you also clearly.
Okay, great. So what you can see on the slide is a park surrounding Imperial Palace in Tokyo. which is quite a piece of land, you would say. But if you look from this
Professor Van Staan, now unfortunately we have lost connection, I think.
Okay, it's still recorded. Yeah. So what happened was that Japan was becoming so rich, so they were lending money with literally no interest. It almost seemed like Japan doesn't want money they were borrowing, they were lending to other countries back. They preferred market shares over profit. So if Japanese companies or investors were investing their monies, they were, for example, trying to buy the whole industry or the biggest share within the industry. And they were not exactly focused on making any profit. You can see the comparison in property values. So for 1 square meters in Ginza, you pay 20,000 US dollars compared to 3,000 US dollars for 1 meter in Knightsbridge in central London. And what happened was that this bubble suddenly popped. It was like a classic example of property bubble, which given the enormous size of it, well, it damaged Japanese economy for a very long period of time. So instead of inflation, they had deflation. People started to save the money, which started a spiral of further damages to the economy. And so we are talking about so-called lost decades in Japan. We can certainly say that 90s were lost decade, and then also 2010 was also a lost decade. It's debatable whether decade from 2010 to 2019 was also lost one. Most likely, yes, at least for some time. Those decades can be described as years with low GDP growth or no growth. So it was like, compared to other nations around, especially China or South Korea or Taiwan, Japan was really struggling, and so they were caught up with neighboring economies who are now a severe competition for Japanese companies in various industries. So after 1989, when the Cold War was over, there were some expectations of Japan, as I mentioned. There was a Gulf War going on, and everyone was expecting that Japan will somehow play its role and as a second largest economy in the world, even though they were kind of struggling with their economy, but still they were very large. They wanted to play an active role in international affairs, so it was expected that they will deliver somehow and they will show their leadership, which they didn't. They weren't able even to send any ships to the conflict. They were not even able to do basic logistics. So they just wrote some checks. They spent like billions for other countries, but they themselves weren't able to contribute in any meaningful way. Which gets me to the role of Japan's self-defense forces. It is said that Japan's self-defense forces are the seventh strongest army in the world, but we have to be very careful with army because due to the Article 9, they are without offensive capabilities. So their purpose is solely to defend Japanese territory, and also they are restricted by not only by the constitution but by laws in Japan, and therefore there are so many efforts to normalize Japan in a sense of whether it is a revision of the constitution, so getting rid of Article 9 in the most extreme case, or to change the Article 9, to acknowledge even existence of Japan self-defense forces. They are not acknowledged by the constitution, or there are other ways how to normalize Japan. One of them is reinterpretation of the constitution, which happened several times in the past. I would say for example, it allowed reinterpretation of Japanese constitution allowed Japan to enter the war in case that key Japanese ally is attacked, and also at the same time.
Our apologies, we're still experiencing some technical difficulties. Professor Van Stal, we're not able to hear you anymore. I believe we've lost connection with Professor Van Stal. Professor Olavarria, your microphone is muted. Our apologies for this inconvenience. Unfortunately, Professor Robert Van Stal is transmitting from his hotel, and unfortunately his internet connection is not that good. So please, I would like to ask some patience so that Professor Van Stal can sort some technical difficulties out. Professor Olavarria, your microphone is muted. We can't hear you. Oh, here is Professor Van Stal back. Professor Van Stal, do you hear us? Can you hear us?
Oh, I'm sorry. Ya, él se está reconectando, perdón, todo lo que dije no me escucharon porque estaba sin volumen. Él se está reconectando.
Yeah.
Estaba
So
llegando.
can you hear me now?
Oh,
Yes, we can hear you.
here you are. Go ahead, Robert. Thank you very much for
I'm
everything.
so sorry about the troubles.
No
When
problem at all.
exactly, at which moment did you lost me?
I got lost a bit as well.
But I think when you were talking about the economic capacity of Japan, and they have to finance their own security policy.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, okay.
They were the seventh strongest army in the world.
Oh, wow. Okay. So seventh strongest army in the world. Yeah. So I will continue without the presentation. So anyway, they lack offensive capabilities due to the Article 9, which restricts them severely in terms of what they can do, and also where they can be deployed and so on. So they still struggle with, for example,
Robert, perhaps you could turn off your camera as well.
Yeah.
And it'll be better.
Can you hear us?
Yes. So
Okay,
as I mentioned, it restricts them in terms of their ability to be deployed somewhere abroad, and therefore there's a strong urge for a constitutional reinterpretation. but it's complicated due to the fact that you need support of your citizens in a referendum, and also you need 2/3 of lower chamber of the parliament. So that's not probably going to happen in no time. So those are probably the most difficult issues for Japanese foreign policy. Even though it's slowly changing, they are increasing their military spending budget, not only because of the rise of the China, which is obviously a problem for them, but also because of Russian invasion in Ukraine, which kind of helped them to argument for, or to give an argument for public in Japan to defend the increase in military spending. So those are the most significant changes in the last years. And what's Japan struggling with still till this day is their heritage in Asia. On one hand, they were inspiration for other Asian nations. They were also as for being independent. So in 60s and 70s, where Asian nations became independent from European powers. Japan was the main inspiration for that. Also, they inspired them Nanking massacre, issues of comfort women, which were women who were forced to prostitution within the army brothels. Then there were issues of forced labor. This is linked to Japanese nationalism, which is very alive till today. There are also territorial disputes from the era between Japan and China over islands in East China Sea. There's a territorial dispute with Russia over Kuril Islands, or so-called or Japan calls it a northern territory. And there's also Takeshima Islands as well. A significant politician of 21st century was Abe Shinzo, well-known prime minister who had a drive to make Japan an important player on the international scene. What helped him that he was the longest-serving prime minister in Japan's history. So for this, he was stable, predictable partner for other world leaders. He's very well known for his special relation with Donald Trump, which was criticized sometimes because he probably nominated Donald Trump for Nobel Peace Prize, and it seemed like he was very servile to Trump. But on the other hand, it was very pragmatic, probably, even though it didn't pay off as he probably would, as he probably wished. Sadly, Shinzo Abe wasn't able to continue due to the health reasons, and he kind of ended very disappointed as he wasn't able to organize Summer Olympic Games, or Japan organized Summer Olympic Games, but in Tokyo in 2020, which happened in 2022, but it was affected by the COVID crisis, and it didn't bring as much tourism into the country. So it was quite a disappointing moment for Shinzo Abe and for Japan as such. Later, Shinzo Abe was killed by attacker on a political rally meeting. It was quite rare incident of political violence in Japan, and unfortunately, Shinzo Abe died after the attack. Now there's a kind of a pupil prime minister, pupil in terms of Shinzo Abe's pupil, or Shinzo Abe's student, of Fumio Kishida, who has also vision for normalizing Japan, and he seems to be following Shinzo Abe's footsteps. However, his stance, for example, towards Russia, it's much harsher. Also, his stance towards China is maybe more hawkish than in case of Shinzo Abe, but he is managing very well to. There are some questions from your side. Thank you for your patience. I can imagine the technical issues, and I'm very sorry for that.
Thank you very much, Professor Vancel, and thank you for your patience. It's not easy to give a lecture under such extremely difficult conditions. So thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting lecture for our students. You highlighted the most important aspects of post-war Japanese political and economic development. So let's start by seeing if any student has any questions for you. Please raise your digital hand. Don't be shy.
Oh,
if not, I can introduce some questions to start things off. Professor Vancel, you talked on several occasions about the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution.
Yes.
The geopolitical situation has changed dramatically since the Second World War in East Asia. There are many scholars and experts who are worried about the lack of, well, not interest, but the lack of resources that the United States has put in the East Asian region. For instance, the UK, together with other countries, especially Australia, are trying to step in. But what is the role of Japan within this different geopolitical conditions, where the United States is still trying to figure out what to do with East Asia, and having Japan, such an important country, tied by this Article 9? How do you see Japan's role in this new geopolitical situation?
Well, obviously, Japan needs to step up its game, so to say. They would need to address the issues related with to have offensive capabilities. Let's say they built a helicopter carrier, which was the largest military ship since the Second World War in Japan. And the helicopter carrier is not generally considered being an offensive capability. However, with slight modifications, it was rebuilt so F-35s can land and fly off this ship. So they can land and take off this ship with just a few modifications. So now Japan has some kind of aircraft carrier as well. So there are ways for Japan to build up some offensive capabilities as well. even though they might be not, very, very, very. I don't want to say it. Then it's not that they are illegal or something, but it's also not very transparent in a sense. So definitely, Japan is a military power, even though severely restricted.
I don't know whether you finished your answer. We couldn't hear the last part. But as a follow-up question, if you're able to hear me, can you hear me?
Yeah. So I'm back again.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, they're trying to build regional alliances or regional structures with other U.S. allies, Australia, India, South Korea, especially in the last year. There was a huge progress in Korean-Japanese relations after they tried to resolve some historical issues. But still, I'm not quite optimistic about that, because in case there's a shift in political shift in Korea, this progress um, might be gone in few weeks. So we'll see about that. But still, Japan is following U.S. leadership, even though they are not as hawkish as United States toward China, and they cannot be, because China is definitely regional. Within the region, it is the most powerful state. It is a large economy. Their economies are interconnected. They are dependent on each other. So Japan cannot simply take stance against China as United States do from time to time.
So if I understand correctly, even though this Article 9 limits Japan's capability to exert regional leadership, uh, according to what you're telling us now, Japan wouldn't even be interested in assuming such a role because of the big neighbor that they have in the shape of China. China, am I correct?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
They're trying to play a role of responsible ally to the United States. They know that freedom of the seas, freedom of navigation, free trade, and everything is guaranteed by the United States. So they will try to help them in making status quo sustainable. But they will definitely not try to become a regional leader, or they will not try to compete with China, and especially in terms of military power. I don't see that coming.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's try again. Students, do you have any questions for Professor Vanstone?
Solo los estudiantes, si no se animan en inglés, lo pueden decir en castellano y se les traduce.
I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I see.
Yes, we have one question from Aldana.
Aldana.
Go ahead, Aldana. Your microphone is there.
Hi, Mr. Vansel. I have a question about Japan's diplomacy. Like, in the recent times, there's something that it came to my mind with the characters. Usually, they bring Pokemon to like trade with other countries, to like as gift. For example, the Pokemon that they brought to to Mr. Boric. So do you think it's really important important in Japan's policy that in Japan's policy the cultural industries? I don't know if my
Yes.
question is right.
Yeah. Well, obviously, Japan plays a lot in its diplomacy and its foreign policy with the card of
Professor Van Saal, if you can hear me, unfortunately we can't hear you.
Also, there is another very interesting question from Rayen in the chat.
Sorry, my microphone muted. Yes, I can see it.
Right.
Let's wait for Professor Van Saal to
Sure.
reconnect, and then we'll ask him. And perhaps, considering the bad connection, perhaps this will be the last question so that we can give some quiet time to Professor Van Saal, because this must be very stressful for him.
Y recordarles a todos que mañana, en el horario de clase a las 16:55, tendremos la clase abierta con el profesor Vancel, sin los problemas de conectividad de hoy día, porque será presencial. El tema será Politics in Central Europe, the case of Slovakia, from Black Hole to Tiger of Europe, en el auditorio de Ingeniería Industrial a las 16:55. Professor Van Saal dice, I'm so sorry, but it doesn't seem to work. Parece que ahí está escribiendo la última cosa. Pareciera ser que no va a poder reconectarse. Reiterarles entonces que mientras sí, parece que no se puede volver a reconectar, pero por favor junten todas las preguntas y el profesor Vancel las va a poder responder mañana. Les reitero, la sesión de mañana es en el auditorium del Departamento de Ingeniería Industrial, donde ya hemos estado antes. El tema va a ser Politics in Central Europe, the case of Slovakia, from Black Hole to Tiger of Europe, a las 16:55 horas. Los estaremos esperando ahí. Nos veremos mañana entonces. El profesor Vancel me manda aquí un mensaje diciendo que ha sido muy frustrante para él estos problemas de conectividad, que está muy apenado y que por favor todas las preguntas que le tenían ahora para él se las pueden hacer mañana y él con mucho gusto las responderá a todas. También mando un saludo a todos nuestros estudiantes, digamos, el agrado de estar con nuestros estudiantes y a la vez la frustración de estos problemas de conectividad que tienen. Mañana vamos a poder estar con él presencialmente. Le paso entonces la palabra al profesor Dingemans para irse ya cerrando esta sesión.
Claro, así que bueno, no está con nosotros en este momento conectado, pero agradecemos por supuesto al profesor por su excelente disposición e interesante lectura y nos volveremos a ver entonces mañana con la actividad que ya fue descrita por el profesor. Muchas gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias a todos, un gran saludo, abrazos a todos.